Hey guys, tonight we're taking a truly heartbreaking journey deep into the opulent, yet often brutal, world of Joseon Dynasty Korea, a land famed for its strict Confucian society, its vibrant culture, and its absolute monarchy. But we're not focusing on the grandeur of the kings or the elaborate court rituals. Instead, we're pulling back the silken curtains to uncover the miserable and invisible life of a Joseon palace maid. Forget romanticized dramas and dreams of royal favor. You're about to discover a grim reality where a young girl's destiny was irrevocably seized by imperial decree, condemning her to a lifelong path of profound personal sacrifice, relentless labor, and an utter erasure of her individuality. This wasn't a choice for personal ambition, it was a forced commitment to perpetual servitude, a gilded cage that offered little more than anonymity and hard labor. Frankly, you probably wouldn't survive the initial entry into the palace without longing for a simple, less demanding, and far less restrictive life in a quiet village. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Tell me, where in the world are you tuning in from? And what time is it for you right now? Dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself suddenly standing in the vast, labyrinthine complex of the Joseon Royal Palace in Hanyang, modern-day Seoul. Perhaps during the 17th or 18th century, the air is thick with the scent of wood smoke, old silk, and the nervous energy of thousands of unseen inhabitants. You are a young girl, perhaps only 4 to 12 years old, your small frame trembling slightly as you gaze up at the towering, ornate gates. You're not a princess, not a noble lady, but a future Gungnyeo, a palace maid. Your childhood, if you were fortunate enough to have one, is now abruptly over, replaced by a life of unending service within these imposing walls. This is a child sacrifice, where your innocent life is chosen for the court, not by you, but by the relentless demands of the imperial system. The reasons why a young girl would become a Joseon palace maid were complex, often tragic, and almost always outside of her personal choice or fervent desire. For the vast majority, it was a decision driven by necessity, desperate family circumstances, or even outright coercion, poverty and debt. This was perhaps the most common reason. Families plunged into dire poverty, burdened by immense debt, or facing starvation, might reluctantly offer their young daughters to the palace. While it meant relinquishing their child, it offered a grim form of security. The girl would be fed, clothed, and sheltered, a basic survival that was often unattainable in the harsh, rural countryside. In return, the family might receive a small sum of money or relief from their debts. Imagine your parents, their faces etched with despair, making the agonizing choice to sacrifice your childhood for the mere survival of your siblings. It truly sucked to be sold to the palace. Forced recruitment, conscription. The palace required a constant, massive influx of labor. Sometimes, imperial officials would actively recruit or conscript young girls from various regions, particularly during periods of high demand for palace servants. This process could be coercive, with families having little recourse to refuse the imperial mandate. Your physical aptitude, your apparent health, or even just your village's quota for palace servants could seal your fate. Political obligation or patronage. Daughters of lower-ranking officials or impoverished noble families might be sent to the palace as a form of patronage, hoping to secure their family's standing or gain royal favor, while ostensibly a path to potential advancement for the family. It was still a life chosen for the girl, not by her. Gift to the palace. In some cases, powerful local officials or wealthy landowners might gift exceptionally beautiful or talented young girls to the palace, hoping to gain favor from the royal family or a powerful court faction. These girls, often seen as commodities, would be destined for various roles, from palace maids to potential royal consorts, their lives utterly dictated by the whims of their patrons. Regardless of how you arrived, your initial entry into the palace was a profound severance from your past, your old identity, your family name often replaced by a generic title reflecting your rank, your connection to your village, your friends, your dreams of marriage and motherhood, all were systematically stripped away. You were immediately immersed in an environment of strict discipline, unwavering hierarchy, and relentless service. This wasn't a home. It was a gilded institution, designed to consume every aspect of your being and transform you into a nameless cog in the vast imperial machinery. It truly sucked to have your identity erased for a job. Your age was a critical factor. Being recruited as young as 4 or 5 years old meant you entered the palace in your earliest, most formative years. Your entire childhood, your adolescence, and your adulthood would be spent within the palace walls. You would grow up knowing no other world, your personality shaped entirely by the rigid rules, the strict hierarchy, and the pervasive culture of the court. This early entry ensured absolute obedience and a complete assimilation into the palace system, severing any lingering ties to your original family or the outside world. The purpose of palace maids was simple: to serve the royal family in every conceivable capacity. Thousands of Gungnyeo worked within the palace walls, performing a bewildering array of duties from the most mundane cleaning, carrying water, tending fires to the highly specialized royal cuisine, laundry, sewing, needlework, managing imperial rituals, attending the royal family's personal needs. Your life was entirely dedicated to the comfort, maintenance, and functioning of the imperial household, ensuring the smooth operation of the king's daily life and the intricate rituals of the court. Your security, paradoxically, came at the cost of your freedom. Once inside the palace, you were virtually confined for life. Leaving the palace was exceptionally rare, permitted only under very specific circumstances, e.g., severe illness that warranted removal, or in later periods. A very few high-ranking maids might be allowed to retire to their hometowns if they survived long enough and had enough accumulated wealth. Any unauthorized attempt to leave or communicate with the outside world would be met with severe punishment, often death, as palace secrets were guarded with extreme vigilance. The towering walls that protected the royal family also served as your prison, ensuring you were forever bound to your imperial duties. It truly sucked to be secure but trapped. One common misconception is that all Joseon palace maids were young, beautiful women who might catch the king's eye, while some palace maids, particularly those who served the royal family directly in intimate roles, could indeed become favored concubines hugung if the king noticed them. The vast majority of Gungnyeo were not chosen for their beauty and spent their entire lives in various menial or specialized service roles, never coming into direct contact with the king. Furthermore, Gungnyeo were divided into a complex hierarchy of departments and ranks, often with specialized training for specific tasks. Their recruitment was primarily based on their family's desperation or their perceived aptitude for service, not necessarily their physical appearance. Historians still meticulously study Joseon dynasty court records like the ilseongnok, the daily records of the king's activities, or the Gungnyeo Eodam, records of palace maids' conversations and administrative documents detailing palace staff to understand the precise recruitment methods, diverse roles, and social stratification within the Gungnyeo system, confirming that the vast majority led lives of unseen labor. Furthermore, the very act of entering the palace as a child meant that your education would be entirely dictated by the imperial system. You wouldn't attend a village school. Instead, you would be trained in the rigorous palace etiquette, the complex rituals, and the specific skills required for your department. Your worldview would be shaped by the strict hierarchy of the court, the omnipresent influence of Confucian ideals, and the unique, isolated culture of the palace. Your entire intellectual and social development would occur within these walls, ensuring your absolute loyalty and complete assimilation into the imperial household. The psychological toll of this profound loss of autonomy and identity would be immense. Your childhood was sacrificed. Your future predetermined. You would live with a constant awareness of your subservient status, your life consumed by endless duties. The emotional void left by your severed familial ties and the denial of personal relationships would be a constant, gnawing pain. This dehumanization, however normalized by the palace system, was a profound and constant source of misery, shaping your very being into a silent, obedient instrument of imperial will. So, your initiation into the life of a Joseon palace maid was a terrifying descent into a child's sacrifice, where your innocent life was chosen for the court at a tender age. This grim recruitment, often driven by family desperation or coercion, stripped you of your personal freedom, severed your ties to the outside world, and condemned you to a lifelong path of relentless service within the vast, imposing walls of the royal palace. This profound loss of autonomy and the abrupt end to your childhood was the first, and perhaps most foundational, aspect of the miserable and invisible life of a Joseon palace maid, having been abruptly seized from your ordinary childhood and thrust into the vast, imposing world of the Joseon royal palace. You, the young palace maid, immediately began a relentless process of training. Forget gentle instruction or nurturing guidance. This was a harsh, grueling regimen designed to systematically strip away your former identity, instill absolute obedience, and mold you into an anonymous, efficient servant, making your life profoundly miserable and invisible. Imagine your earliest days within the palace walls. You were likely placed in a nursery or training quarters with dozens of other young girls, equally bewildered and terrified. Your life, from this moment on, was dictated by an unyielding schedule and the strict commands of your senior palace maids and eunuchs, who served as your instructors and disciplinarians. The goal was not personal development, but complete assimilation into the intricate machinery of the imperial household. It truly sucked to have your education be about forgetting who you were. The training regimen was comprehensive and brutal, designed to break your individual will and replace it with unwavering deference and conformity. It involved meticulous etiquette and protocol. This was paramount. You would spend countless hours learning the labyrinthine rules of palace etiquette, how to walk a slow, gliding pace, how to bow with precise angles for different ranks, how to speak using specific honorifics and a deferential tone, and even how to sit, stand, and serve. Every gesture, every facial expression, every subtle movement was meticulously choreographed and rigorously enforced. Imagine practicing a perfect bow hundreds of times, your muscles aching, knowing that a single misstep could be seen as disrespect and lead to severe punishment. You were being trained to become an extension of the palace's rigid order, relentless drudgery, and menial tasks. Your early training involved extensive physical labor, often the most unpleasant and repetitive chores. You might spend hours sweeping vast courtyards, scrubbing latrines which despite palace grandeur, were primitive and often foul-smelling, carrying heavy buckets of water, fetching firewood, or polishing endless bronze ornaments. These tasks were designed not just to teach you essential skills, but to instill humility, break your spirit, and condition your body for a lifetime of hard work. Your hands, once soft, would quickly become calloused and rough. It really sucked to clean up after royalty all day. Memorization of palace rules and hierarchy, the Joseon palace operated on an incredibly complex and unforgiving hierarchy. You would spend countless hours memorizing the ranks of palace maids, eunuchs, court ladies, and consorts, understanding who outranked whom, what honorifics to use, and whose commands were absolute. Any breach of this hierarchy, even accidental, could lead to severe penalties. You learn to navigate this intricate social ladder with extreme caution, perpetually aware of your own low status. The art of invisibility. Perhaps the most crucial lesson was to become invisible. As a palace maid, your role was to serve, to facilitate the lives of the royal family, but never to draw attention to yourself. You learned to move silently, to anticipate needs without being asked, to observe without being noticed. Your personal opinions, your feelings, your very presence were to be minimized. This constant suppression of your individuality, this deliberate erasure of yourself was central to your training. You were taught to exist as a silent shadow, a background figure in the grand drama of the court. The discipline was harsh and uncompromising. Your instructors, senior palace maids and eunuchs who had themselves endured this brutal training, enforced the rules with an unyielding strictness. Physical punishment was common slaps, beatings with wooden sticks, or forced kneeling for long periods. Imagine a severe rap on the knuckles for an incorrectly folded garment, or being forced to kneel for hours on cold stone for a whispered word. This constant threat of corporal punishment would hang over you, turning every lesson into a source of anxiety, ensuring absolute obedience through fear. It really sucked to live under constant threat of a beating. Your identity was systematically stripped away. Your family name, your village origin, your personal hopes and dreams all were intentionally suppressed. You were given a new identity, often a generic title or number reflecting your department or rank. To reinforce your role as a property of the palace, you were molded into a standardized unit of service, ensuring uniformity and unwavering loyalty to the institution, rather than to your former family or self. This dehumanization, though pervasive, was seen as necessary to create the perfect, obedient servant. The isolation from your past was profound. Communication with your family outside the palace walls was severely restricted, often limited to rare, supervised visits or carefully vetted letters, if permitted at all. You were taught that your loyalty now belonged entirely to the palace, and any lingering ties to your old life were to be severed. This physical and emotional detachment from your original family contributed to a profound sense of loneliness and rootlessness, making the palace your only, albeit demanding, home. It really sucked to be a stranger to your own family. One common misconception is that Joseon palace maids, particularly the Gungnyeo, were primarily focused on being beautiful or charming to catch the king's eye. In reality, while beauty might play a role for a select few who became royal consorts Hugung, the vast majority of Gungnyeo were recruited for their ability to perform specific arduous service roles, from cooking and laundry to accounting and ritual preparation. Their training was highly practical, emphasizing efficiency, discipline, and the precise execution of tasks rather than personal allure. The Gungnyeo were a massive, highly stratified bureaucracy of female labor. Essential for the daily functioning of the court, historians still meticulously study Joseon dynasty court records like the Gungnyeo Eodam, a collection of palace maids' conversations, and official palace staff rosters to understand the precise details of their training, their diverse roles, and the strict hierarchy that governed their daily lives, consistently revealing a system focused on arduous labor rather than simple charm. Furthermore, the physical environment of the palace itself contributed to the harshness of your training. While grand, many areas were cold, damp, and dimly lit, as discussed in the episode about Joseon queens' lives. You would train and work in these uncomfortable conditions, further taxing your young body and making every movement a deliberate effort. The grandeur of the palace was a backdrop to your endless toil, not a source of comfort. The psychological toll of this relentless training would be immense. You would constantly battle fatigue, fear of punishment, and the systematic suppression of your own will and identity, the demands for absolute deference, the pervasive atmosphere of discipline, and the constant awareness of your low status would erode your spirit. You were being remade, transformed from a free individual into a perfectly obedient servant, and this profound internal change, however subtle, was a deeply painful and isolating process. The rigorous training for Gungnyeo was not merely about practical skills. It was deeply intertwined with Confucian ideals of obedience, filial piety now directed towards the king and queen, and self-control. You were taught that your purpose was to serve the monarch, ensuring the harmony of the royal household, which in turn was believed to bring harmony to the nation. This ideological indoctrination provided a framework for your arduous duties, theoretically elevating your service to a sacred duty, but simultaneously binding you even more tightly to your fate. So, your initiation into the life of a Joseon palace maid was a profound and miserable journey of training, marked by brutal discipline, relentless drudgery, and systematic dehumanization. Your old identity was stripped away, replaced by an unwavering obedience and a precise adherence to palace protocol. This arduous, all-consuming conditioning was a defining, profoundly challenging aspect of your life, transforming you into an efficient, anonymous servant within the formidable, yet utterly restrictive walls of the royal palace. Having been utterly molded by rigorous training and relentless discipline, you, the Joseon palace maid, immediately confronted the unyielding reality of your place in the court's caste system. Forget personal merit or individual talent. Your entire existence was defined by an unbreakable palace hierarchy, dictating your every interaction and rigidly limiting any hope of true advancement, making your life profoundly miserable and invisible. Imagine your daily life in the sprawling palace, teeming with thousands of inhabitants, while the king and queen occupied the pinnacle. Below them lay an intricate, bewildering, and utterly rigid social stratification that governed everyone, from the highest-ranking minister to the lowest thrall. You, as a Gungnyeo, belonged to a specific, highly controlled class of female palace servants, a world within a world, with its own complex internal hierarchy that dictated your duties, your living conditions, and your very interactions. It truly sucked to be born into a human ladder. The hierarchy of palace maids was incredibly detailed and unforgiving. You might start at the very bottom as a na-in-9 or sengagsi, a young, newly recruited maid, responsible for the most menial and arduous tasks. Your superiors would be older, more experienced maids, who in turn answered to higher-ranking sangung or sangi, who managed entire departments or served the royal family directly. Every interaction you had, every task you performed, every space you occupied was dictated by your precise rank. Imagine a constant, unspoken awareness of where you stood on this ladder, with every glance, every word, every gesture reflecting your exact position. This rigid system meant fixed roles and limited mobility. If you were assigned to the laundry department, you would likely spend your entire career washing clothes. If you were in the kitchen, you would remain a cook, while some advancement within a specific department was possible. Rising from a low-ranking na-in to a sangung was rare, incredibly competitive, and often required immense political acumen, strategic alliances, or sheer luck. Transcending your designated role was almost impossible. Your entire life's trajectory was predetermined by your initial assignment and your rank, leaving little room for personal ambition or career change. It really sucked to have your entire life planned out by someone else. Your interactions with the royal family and high-ranking consorts were strictly governed by this hierarchy. You would perform your duties in their presence, but your gaze would be lowered, your movements silent, your responses brief and deferential. You were to be observed, but not to observe, to serve, but not to engage as an equal. Even if you served a beloved concubine or a kind princess, the fundamental power imbalance was always present, ensuring your subordinate status. Imagine serving meals to the king or dressing the queen, your hands touching their silken robes, yet knowing you were utterly invisible to them as a person. It truly sucked to be an unseen shadow for royalty. The palace's caste system also dictated your living conditions. Lower-ranking maids would share cramped, often cold, dormitories with dozens of others, lacking any privacy. Higher-ranking sangung might have a small private room, but their lives were still bound by the palace walls and relentless duties. Your food, while regular, would be simple and monotonous, differing significantly from the lavish meals of the royal family. Your clothes would be basic, utilitarian versions of the palace's elegant attire, always reflecting your low station. The concept of cheonmin, seonmin, the lowest social class in Joseon society, including butchers, shamans, and sometimes palace servants, also implicitly played a role. Even if you weren't technically part of that specific group, the general perception of palace maids, while essential, was still tied to service, a form of labor that was not considered noble in Confucian society. This subtle social stigma from the outside world, combined with the rigid internal palace hierarchy, reinforced your marginalized status. One common misconception is that all Joseon palace maids Gungnyeo were beautiful women secretly hoping to become royal consorts. In reality, while a select few palace maids who served in intimate roles might catch the king's eye and be elevated to concubines hugung. Hugung, the vast majority of Gungnyeo, were recruited primarily for their ability to perform specific, demanding, and often mundane service roles. Their selection criteria were often based on aptitude for specific tasks, cooking, sewing, accounting, or family connections, not solely beauty. Furthermore, the average age of a Gungnyeo was often older, with many serving their entire lives and never encountering the king personally. This highly specialized bureaucratic system of female labor ensured that most Gungnyeo remained anonymous servants. Historians still meticulously study Joseon dynasty court records, including palace staff rosters and detailed regulations for each department, e.g., the Gungnyeo Eodam, a collection of palace maids' conversations and daily lives to understand the precise structure, roles, and internal hierarchy within the Gungnyeo system, consistently revealing a far more complex and labor-intensive reality than popular dramas suggest. Furthermore, The very rules of palace protocol Gungjungbeopdo were designed to maintain this rigid hierarchy. Every greeting, every seating arrangement, every procession was a visible performance of rank. Any deviation, any perceived disrespect from a lower-ranking maid towards a superior or a failure to properly defer to a noble would be met with swift and harsh punishment. This constant enforcement of rank created an atmosphere of pervasive fear and strict adherence to social boundaries. You learn to navigate this complex web with extreme caution, knowing a single misstep could lead to demotion or a beating. The psychological toll of existing within such a rigid caste system would be immense. You would constantly be aware of your low status, your lack of personal agency, and your predetermined life path. The suppression of your individual personality, the constant need to defer, and the elusive hope of significant advancement could lead to feelings of profound resignation, resentment, or quiet despair. Your entire existence was defined by your rank, your duties, and your place in a system that valued uniformity and obedience above all else. Ensuring that your life was a perpetual act of self-denial, the emotional isolation within the system was also profound. While you lived alongside your sisters in service, the pervasive competition for favor, the fear of informers, and the strict adherence to protocol often limited opportunities for genuine emotional intimacy or uninhibited conversation. Your bonds were forged through shared misery and common duty, but rarely through true personal vulnerability. You were part of a collective, but ultimately alone in your silent struggle within the palace walls. So your life as a Joseon palace maid was profoundly miserable and invisible because it was consumed by an unbreakable palace hierarchy. This rigid caste system dictated your every action, limited your advancement, and defined your very being within the confines of the royal court. The constant awareness of your low status, coupled with relentless discipline and the suppression of individuality, was a defining, profoundly miserable aspect of your existence. Ensuring your life was a perpetual act of unseen servitude within a majestic, yet utterly unforgiving, gilded cage. Even as you navigated the rigid social stratification of the palace, your days as a Joseon palace maid were utterly consumed by endless toil. Forget dreams of leisure. Your existence was defined by relentless, often physically exhausting, and largely unseen labor, hour after hour, day and night, making your life profoundly miserable and invisible. Imagine your daily routine, a demanding schedule that began long before dawn, often around 4 a.m. or 5 a.m., and stretched late into the night. You were among the first to rise and the last to sleep, your life dictated by the constant needs of the royal family and the vast palace bureaucracy. There was no concept of a work-life balance for a palace maid. Your entire waking existence was consumed by duties, leaving little to no time for personal pursuits, rest, or even basic comfort. It truly sucked to be perpetually exhausted. Your labor was incredibly diverse, spanning almost every imaginable domestic and administrative task required to run the largest household in the kingdom. You were part of a vast, unseen army of female workers, each specializing in a particular area. Cleaning and maintenance. This was a pervasive, never-ending task. You might spend hours sweeping vast courtyards, meticulously polishing intricate wooden structures, scrubbing latrines which, despite palace grandeur, were primitive and often foul-smelling, or cleaning the hundreds of rooms within the various palace complexes. The sheer scale of the palace meant constant effort to maintain its grandeur, a battle against dust, grime, and the effluvia of thousands of inhabitants. Your hands would be raw from constant scrubbing, your back aching from bending and lifting. It really sucked to clean up after royalty all day, every day. Water and fuel. Fetching water was a continuous, physically demanding chore. You might carry heavy buckets of water from central wells or cisterns to various palace kitchens, bathing areas, or private chambers. Similarly, you would haul immense quantities of firewood or straw to fuel the ondol heating systems and cooking fires, especially during the brutal Joseon winters. This often meant venturing outside into the bitter cold, battling snow or ice, adding significant physical strain to your daily routine. Laundry and sewing. The palace generated an immense volume of laundry, from the everyday robes of thousands of servants to the delicate silks of the royal family. You might spend hours hand-washing heavy fabrics in cold water, scrubbing, rinsing, and drying. Similarly, countless hours would be spent on meticulous sewing, repairing garments, or creating new robes, tapestries, and bedding for the royal family, often involving intricate needlework that strained your eyes in dim lighting. Kitchen duties. If assigned to one of the palace kitchens, your duties would involve preparing enormous quantities of food for the royal family, the court, and the thousands of palace residents. This meant endless chopping, grinding, cooking, and cleaning, often in hot, smoky, and crowded conditions. The sheer scale of royal banquets and daily meals demanded constant, strenuous labor. Personal attendants, higher-ranking palace maids might serve the king, queen, or royal consorts directly, assisting with their elaborate dressing, bathing, and personal needs. While seemingly prestigious, these roles demanded unwavering attention, constant deference, and meticulous adherence to complex protocols, often for long, unpredictable hours. You had to anticipate every need, move silently, and essentially become an invisible extension of the royal person, leaving little room for your own self. It really sucked to dress a royal, only for them to ignore you. Specialized tasks beyond these common duties. Gungnyeo specialized in a bewildering array of tasks managing royal finances, keeping meticulous records, overseeing complex rituals, performing medical duties, tending to palace gardens, or even acting as messengers. Each task, no matter how seemingly small, demanded unwavering diligence and precision, as any error could lead to severe punishment. The monotony and repetition of these tasks were profound. Day after day, year after year, you would perform the same arduous duties, driven by the strict palace rules and the insatiable demands of the royal household. There was little variation, little personal choice in your assignments. Your labor was a form of spiritual discipline, a way to occupy your body and prevent idleness. But it came at the cost of immense physical fatigue and mental tedium. Your entire life's trajectory was often confined to a single department, a single set of tasks for decades. The physical toll of this endless toil was immense and cumulative. Your body would be perpetually tired, your muscles aching from constant bending, lifting, hauling, and repetitive motions. Your hands would be rough, calloused, and often raw from washing or working with coarse materials. Your feet would ache from hours of standing and walking on hard palace grounds. Over years, this relentless physical exertion would lead to chronic pain, joint problems, and premature aging. Your body was constantly pushed to its limits, slowly breaking down under the weight of unrelenting service. It really sucked to feel your body literally wear out. The lack of adequate rest exacerbated your misery. With days starting before dawn and ending late at night, your sleep was often severely limited and frequently interrupted by duties. Chronic sleep deprivation would lead to perpetual fatigue, impaired concentration, and a general dullness of mind and body, making every task more arduous and every moment a struggle against exhaustion. Your diligence was bought at the cost of your own well-being. One common misconception is that all Joseon palace maids led lives of relatively pampered luxury, hoping to become consorts in reality, while the palace offered basic security food, shelter that might be better than rural poverty. The vast majority of Gungnyeo performed arduous, low-status manual labor for their entire lives. Often without direct contact with the king or queen, their existence was more akin to that of highly specialized, disciplined domestic servants, working tirelessly to maintain the imperial household. The very term Gungnyeo encompassed a wide range of ranks and duties, with only a tiny fraction ever achieving significant prestige or influence. Historians still meticulously study Joseon dynasty palace records, including labor rosters, departmental duties, and even disciplinary records, to understand the precise nature of Gungnyeo life, consistently revealing the pervasive reality of intense physical labor. Furthermore, the invisibility of your labor was a profound psychological burden. You were expected to serve, to contribute, but never to be seen or acknowledged as an individual. Your countless hours of cleaning, cooking, sewing, and maintaining the palace simply allowed the royal family to live a life of comfort and splendor. Your efforts were absorbed into the seamless functioning of the imperial household. Without individual recognition or gratitude, your misery was unseen, your contribution uncelebrated. It truly sucked to be an invisible workhorse. The strict discipline and the fear of punishment, as discussed in Chapter 2, further intensified the burden of endless toil. Any perceived laziness, any error, any failure to meet expectations would be met with severe retribution. This constant pressure to perform flawlessly, even when exhausted, meant you pushed yourself beyond your limits. Driven by fear rather than by inherent loyalty or personal satisfaction, your body was driven by the whip of efficiency. Whether metaphorical or literal, the lack of personal freedom inherent in your role meant you had no escape from this ceaseless labor. You could not quit. You could not seek other employment, and you could rarely leave the palace walls. Your life was utterly consumed by your duties, ensuring that your existence was a perpetual cycle of work and exhaustion. With little hope of reprieve or personal fulfillment, your home was a workplace from which you could not retire. So, your daily life as a Joseon palace maid was profoundly miserable and invisible because it was utterly consumed by endless toil. From relentless cleaning and heavy hauling to meticulous sewing and demanding kitchen duties, your existence was defined by physically exhausting, monotonous labor that stretched from before dawn until late at night. This pervasive, unacknowledged physical strain, essential for the palace's functioning, was a defining, profoundly miserable aspect of your existence, ensuring that your life was a continuous act of unseen servitude, paid for with your aching body and your profound exhaustion. Even as your young body was relentlessly consumed by endless toil and the palace's rigid hierarchy, your very existence as a Joseon palace maid was strictly governed by protocol. Forget spontaneous actions or personal whims. Your life was a meticulously choreographed performance, where every single movement, every word, and every interaction was dictated by suffocating etiquette and unwavering rules, making your service profoundly miserable and invisible. Imagine your daily routine. It didn't begin with personal choice. It was a complex ballet of prescribed actions that commenced even before dawn and continued until late into the night. Your role demanded constant vigilance and an unwavering adherence to a vast, intricate web palace etiquette, Gungjungbyobdo. Gungjungbeopdo. This wasn't merely about good manners, it was about maintaining the harmony and dignity of the royal household, reflecting cosmic order, and subtly reinforcing the absolute power of the monarch. Every deviation, however small, could be seen as a challenge to this sacred order. It truly sucked to be a human robot. Your morning toilette was not a private affair. It was a formal process, assisted by other palace maids, where your hair would be meticulously styled and your simple uniform robes appropriate to your rank and department donned with precision. You had no say in your attire. Your clothing was a uniform, a visual representation of your specific role within the vast palace bureaucracy. Then came the countless formal interactions. Whether you were serving the king, the queen, a royal consort, or a high-ranking Sangung senior palace maid, your every move was dictated. Walking you would not simply stroll. Your pace would be measured, your posture upright, your steps silent. When passing by a royal personage or a superior, you would bow with precise angles, your gaze lowered, always displaying deference and humility. Speaking, your voice would be soft, your words carefully chosen, using specific honorifics and deferential language appropriate to the rank of the person you were addressing. Casual conversation, idle gossip, or expressing personal opinions was strictly forbidden, seen as undignified or even a sign of disrespect. Imagine having to censor your every thought, perpetually aware that a single wrong word could lead to severe punishment. Serving every act of service, from pouring tea to presenting a document, was performed with meticulous precision. Your hands would be held in a particular way, your movements smooth and silent, ensuring you never inadvertently made noise or drew attention to yourself. The goal was to anticipate needs without being asked, to be efficient yet utterly unobtrusive. You were a living extension of their comfort, but never a noticeable presence. Meals were consumed according to strict protocol. If you were serving the royal family, you would stand silently by, anticipating their needs, your attention fixed on their subtle cues. If you were eating in a communal dining hall with other maids, silence was often enforced, and rules about portions and seating would apply. Even the act of eating, a fundamental human pleasure, was governed by rigid discipline, further diminishing any personal enjoyment. The lack of personal freedom was total. You could not choose your duties, your schedule, or even your moments of rest. Your life was meticulously regimented from before dawn until late into the night. Dictated by the relentless demands of the royal household, there was no time for personal pursuits, hobbies, or private reflection. Your every moment was dedicated to service, your existence utterly consumed by the palace's needs. It truly sucked to have your entire life be a schedule. Movement within the palace was also severely restricted by your rank and department. You could not simply wander freely through the vast palace complex. Certain areas were off limits to lower-ranking maids. Access to others required explicit permission, and your movements were always accompanied by your colleagues or supervised by superiors. You lived in a gilded cage, surrounded by beautiful gardens and opulent pavilions, but unable to explore them at will, seeing them only as backdrops to your endless duties. The outside world, beyond the palace walls, became a distant, fading memory. One common misconception is that Joseon palace maids led relatively comfortable lives compared to outside laborers. In reality, while they were provided basic food and shelter, their lives were characterized by extreme discipline, hard work, and pervasive limitations on personal freedom. The concept of protocol for Gungnyeo went far beyond mere politeness. It was a comprehensive system of control designed to create a perfectly obedient and efficient workforce. ensuring the smooth functioning of the royal household without individual deviation. Historians still meticulously study Joseon dynasty court chronicles like the veritable records of the Joseon dynasty, palace staff rosters, and detailed administrative regulations such as those for the royal secretariat or various palace departments to understand the precise rules and daily routines that govern the lives of palace maids, consistently revealing a highly regulated and demanding existence. Furthermore, the very concept of humility and deference was deeply ingrained through this protocol. You were constantly reminded of your subservient status, your personal desires always secondary to the will of the monarch and your superiors. This constant suppression of your ego, this relentless act of putting others first, contributed to a profound emotional toll. Your personal identity was designed to be absorbed into your role as a loyal servant, ensuring you were seen as a functional part of the palace machine. Rather than a distinct individual, the psychological toll of living under such suffocating protocol would be immense. The constant need to be vigilant, to control every movement and every word, to suppress your natural emotions, and to perpetually perform a role would lead to profound mental exhaustion. The fear of making a mistake, of inadvertently offending a superior, or of breaking a rule would create pervasive anxiety, chipping away at your peace of mind. Your dignity was constantly at stake, and your self-worth was measured by your adherence to this complex, unforgiving system. The invisibility you were trained for was a key aspect of this protocol. Your purpose was to facilitate, not to be noticed. While essential, your labor was designed to be seamless, unacknowledged, and unobtrusive. This meant that your contributions, however vital, often went unseen and unappreciated, further reinforcing your anonymity within the vast palace walls. Your life was a silent backdrop to the lives of royalty, ensuring your suffering remained largely unacknowledged. So, your daily life as a Joseon palace maid was profoundly miserable and invisible because it was consumed by strict protocol. Every single movement, every word, and every interaction was dictated by suffocating etiquette and unwavering rules, transforming your service into a meticulously choreographed performance. This relentless adherence to rigid protocol, leaving no room for spontaneity or personal freedom, was a defining, profoundly miserable aspect of your existence, ensuring that your life was a continuous act of regulated, unseen servitude within the formidable, yet utterly restrictive, walls of the royal palace, even as you meticulously followed every dictate of palace protocol and endured relentless toil. Your life as a Joseon palace maid was constantly shadowed by a deeper, more insidious misery, the master's whim. Forget fair treatment or stable routines. Your precarious existence was entirely dependent on the unpredictable moods, shifting favors, and arbitrary power of the royal family, making your service profoundly miserable and invisible. Imagine the pervasive anxiety that gnawed at you with every passing day. Your entire life, your very security, rested on the capricious will of the king, the queen, or the royal consorts you served. Their good mood could bring a fleeting moment of relief, perhaps a kind word or a small gift, but their displeasure, however minor or unprovoked, could plunge you into immediate peril, leading to severe punishment or even the abrupt termination of your service. You were constantly attuned to their subtle cues, perpetually trying to anticipate their needs and avoid their wrath. It truly sucked to be at the mercy of someone else's bad day. The king's imgum favor was the most powerful, yet most volatile, force in the palace. While you, as a lower-ranking palace maid, might rarely interact directly with the king, his preferences and his temper influenced everyone above you, directly impacting your daily life. If he favored a particular consort, her demands might increase, and her existing maids might be elevated or rewarded. If he was in a bad mood, the entire palace would hold its breath, and severe punishments could be meted out for the smallest infractions. Imagine living under the shadow of a single individual's unpredictable temperament, knowing his whims could directly affect your well-being, or even your life. It really sucked to be a mood ring for the king. Royal consorts Hugung and the queen Jungjun. Jungjun also wielded immense power over their palace maids. They managed their own internal households, and their specific needs and rivalries, as discussed in a previous episode about the queen's miserable life, directly translated into demands and pressures on their maids. A favored consort might be generous, but a jealous or demanding one could make your life a living hell, constantly criticizing, assigning impossible tasks, or even accusing you of wrongdoing to gain an advantage over a rival. You were caught in the crossfire of their ambition and insecurity. Your life defined by their personal politics, arbitrary punishment was a constant threat, while formal palace rules existed. Their application was often at the discretion of the royal family or your direct superior's senior palace maids or eunuchs. A perceived slight, a minor mistake, a moment of clumsiness, or even just being in the wrong place at the wrong time could lead to severe retribution. Punishments ranged from verbal reprimands, harsh, humiliating scoldings, often delivered publicly, designed to strip you of your dignity. Beatings. Physical beatings with sticks or whips were common for various infractions, leaving you bruised, in pain, and utterly humiliated. Imagine the searing pain, the raw welts, knowing you had to return to your duties immediately, your suffering unseen by the royal family, reduced rations or extra duties, a cruel punishment for a body already perpetually hungry and exhausted. Confinement or demotion, being confined to a small, dark room, or demoted to a lower, more arduous rank, effectively destroying your career. Expulsion from the palace for severe infractions. You could be brutally cast out of the palace, stripped of all security, and facing destitution in the outside world. A terrifying prospect for someone who knew no other life. Execution, in the most extreme cases of perceived treason, theft of royal property, or involvement in palace conspiracies. Execution was a horrifying possibility, often carried out swiftly and secretly within the palace grounds. Imagine witnessing a fellow maid, perhaps one you knew, being dragged away for a beating, her screams echoing through the silent corridors, a chilling reminder of your own precarious existence. This constant proximity to arbitrary violence and harsh judgment created a pervasive atmosphere of fear, ensuring obedience through terror. You learned to live on edge, perpetually trying to anticipate and avoid displeasure, a profound psychological burden. It really sucked to literally have to guess what would get you beaten. The insecurity of your position was profound. Unlike many external professions with some form of contract or guild protection, your service as a palace maid was entirely dependent on your individual performance and the continued favor of your royal masters. There was no job security, a change in the king's affections, a new queen ascending, or a powerful faction losing influence could mean your immediate demotion or expulsion. Regardless of your loyal service, your livelihood, your safety, and your future were perpetually unstable. One common misconception is that Joseon dynasty palace maids were all long-term, stable employees. In reality, while some elite Sangung senior maids served for decades and held considerable influence, The vast majority of Gungnyeo palace maids were low-ranking, easily replaceable, and lived highly precarious lives. Their numbers fluctuated based on the needs of the court, and dismissals could be arbitrary. This constant possibility of being cast out, without warning or recourse, was a pervasive source of anxiety for ordinary palace maids. Historians still meticulously study Joseon dynasty administrative records, particularly disciplinary logs and palace staff rosters, to understand the precise rates of dismissal, promotion, and punishment, confirming the constant insecurity faced by Gungnyeo. Furthermore, the lack of any external appeal or recourse for injustice exacerbated your misery. If you felt unjustly punished, there was no independent court or authority to appeal to. Your only recourse was to plead with your direct superior, whose decision was often final, or to simply endure your suffering in silence. This complete absence of an external justice system within the palace walls meant you were utterly at the mercy of those who wielded power over you, ensuring that any perceived injustice had to be endured with stoicism, or risk even harsher consequences. Your freedom, if you had any, was internal. The psychological toll of living under such a system of arbitrary power would be immense. You would live with perpetual anxiety, constantly self-censoring your words and actions, trying to anticipate moods, and fearing unseen threats. This relentless vigilance, this inability to truly relax or be yourself, would erode your peace of mind, leading to profound stress, paranoia, and a pervasive sense of helplessness. Your existence was a constant tightrope walk, defined by the whims of others, ensuring that your life was a perpetual battle for mere survival and emotional fortitude. Your very spirit was perpetually stressed. The ultimate irony was that your profound invisibility, as discussed in Chapter 4, offered no protection from this arbitrary power. You were meant to be unseen, unheard, a seamless part of the palace machinery, yet this invisibility did not shield you from the whip, from dismissal, or from the arbitrary demands of your masters. Your anonymity made you disposable, a convenient target for a frustrated noble or a ruthless superior, ensuring that your suffering remained largely unacknowledged and unrecorded. So, your life as a Joseon palace maid was profoundly miserable and invisible because it was utterly dominated by the master's whim. Your precarious existence, dependent on the unpredictable moods and arbitrary power of the royal family and your superiors, ensured a constant threat of harsh punishment, demotion, or expulsion. This pervasive insecurity, coupled with the profound lack of personal agency, was a defining, profoundly miserable aspect of your service, ensuring that your gilded cage was a permanent state of fearful subservience. Even as you navigated the terrifying whims of your masters and endured the physical toll of unending toil, your life as a Joseon palace maid imposed another profound and heartbreaking misery: forbidden love. Forget dreams of romance, marriage, or motherhood. Your commitment to lifelong celibacy and the complete denial of personal relationships ensured a profound emotional isolation, making your service profoundly miserable and invisible. Imagine the pervasive emptiness that would settle upon you as your youthful years passed within the palace walls. From the moment you entered the palace as a child, your life was implicitly consecrated to service, meaning you were expected to live a life of celibacy. This wasn't explicitly a vow in the same way a nun's might be, but it was an unbreakable, unwritten rule of the Gungnyeo system. You were effectively forbidden from marriage, from forming romantic relationships, and from having children. Your body was dedicated to the king and queen's household, not to personal fulfillment. It truly sucked to be condemned to a life without Svein. This denial of personal relationships was not just about sexual abstinence. It was a profound emotional isolation. You lived surrounded by thousands of people, yet you were cut off from the most fundamental human bonds. Your familial ties were severely restricted as discussed in Chapter 1, and while you formed bonds with other palace maids, these relationships were often tempered by the rigid hierarchy, the constant competition for favor, and the pervasive fear of informers, as we'll discuss in Chapter 8, genuine intimacy, unguarded emotional expression, and the simple comfort of true. Unconditional friendship were rare luxuries. Imagine living for decades, surrounded by faces, but never truly being able to share your deepest joys, sorrows, or fears without risking your position or security. It truly sucked to be surrounded by people, but still be utterly alone. The strict palace protocol, as discussed in Chapter 5, further enforced this isolation. Your movements, your conversations, and your interactions were meticulously controlled, limiting opportunities for any illicit encounters or even innocent romantic development. You were constantly under surveillance, every glance, every whispered word potentially scrutinized by zealous superiors or jealous rivals. The palace, for all its grandeur, was a vast, glittering prison designed to suppress personal desires and prevent any distractions from your duties. The consequences for violating this unspoken rule of celibacy, particularly for engaging in a romantic relationship or becoming pregnant, were devastating and often fatal. If discovered, you would face immediate and severe punishment, including torture to extract confessions about your partner and any accomplices. Execution, often by secret means within the palace, or a public execution for greater deterrence. A pregnant palace maid would be seen as a profound threat to the purity of the royal line and the stability of the court. An unforgivable transgression, annihilation of family. Your actions could bring severe repercussions upon your birth family, leading to their disgrace, banishment, or even execution, turning your personal tragedy into a devastating blow for your loved ones. This pervasive threat ensured that any natural human desires for love or intimacy were brutally suppressed. You learned to internalize these restrictions, to channel your energies into your duties, and to accept a life devoid of romance. The fear of discovery and the horrifying consequences acted as a constant, chilling deterrent, ensuring your lifelong adherence to the unspoken code. It really sucked to be physically restrained by fear. The denial of motherhood was perhaps the most heartbreaking aspect of this sacrifice. In Joseon society, a woman's primary purpose and source of fulfillment was often seen in marriage and bearing children, particularly sons. You, as a palace maid, were explicitly denied this fundamental experience. You would witness the royal consorts vying for the king's attention, bearing princes and princesses, while your own maternal instincts were systematically suppressed. The knowledge that you would never experience the joys of raising your own child, never have a son to carry on your lineage, would be a constant, gnawing emptiness, a profound personal loss that no amount of palace privilege could ever fill. It truly sucked to have your womb be empty by decree. One common misconception is that all Joseon palace maids were entirely devoid of romantic or sexual feelings, while their lives were strictly controlled, and the consequences of transgression severe. Human nature cannot be entirely suppressed. Historical records, though rare and often scandalous in nature, sometimes hint at secret relationships, forbidden affairs between palace maids and eunuchs, or even with outside men who gained illicit access. These rare instances, when discovered, were met with extreme brutality, precisely because they fundamentally challenge the strict palace order and the expected celibacy of palace maids. Historians still meticulously study such rare and often biased accounts, interpreting them carefully to understand the human realities and emotional lives of the palace maids beyond the official narratives of strict obedience. Furthermore, the isolation of your professional life, as discussed in Chapter 3 and 4, compounded this emotional void. You had no one outside the palace walls to confide in, no close family members who understood your unique plight, even within the palace. The rigid hierarchy and the fear of informers, as we'll discuss in Chapter 8, limited true emotional intimacy, leaving you profoundly alone in your struggles, battling your natural human desires in agonizing silence. Your inner world became a fortress of suppressed emotions, where love was a dangerous, forbidden dream. The psychological toll of lifelong celibacy and the profound denial of personal relationships would be immense. You would grapple with feelings of loneliness, unfulfilled longing, and a pervasive sense of emptiness, the constant struggle to suppress your natural desires, to conform to an unnatural ideal, would erode your spirit, leading to profound melancholy or a chilling detachment from your own emotions. Your existence became a testament to enduring self-denial. Your inner world a silent landscape of unfulfilled dreams. The eventual retirement for a few high-ranking palace maids, if it ever came, offered little solace for this profound sacrifice. Even if allowed to leave, they would be older women, often without family, social connections, or the means to build a personal life after decades of enforced celibacy. The warmth of human connection, once denied, could rarely be reclaimed in their twilight years, leaving them in profound solitude outside of the palace walls. So, your life as a Joseon palace maid was profoundly miserable and invisible because of forbidden love. Your commitment to lifelong celibacy, imposed by the strict palace rules, denied you any form of romantic relationship, marriage, or motherhood. This profound emotional isolation, coupled with the terrifying consequences of transgression, ensured your existence was a continuous act of self-denial, making your life a silent, agonizing testament to unfulfilled desires and pervasive loneliness within the gilded cage of the royal palace. Even as you wrestled with the agonizing reality of forbidden love and the chilling emptiness of emotional isolation, your seemingly secure life as a Joseon palace maid was perpetually shadowed by a more insidious, ever-present danger palace intrigue. Forget trusting your colleagues. Your existence was defined by whispers, spies, and silent betrayal, making your service profoundly miserable and invisible. Imagine the pervasive atmosphere within the vast palace complex. While outwardly serene, with its ornate pavilions and manicured gardens, the inner court was a viper's nest of ambition, jealousy, and ruthless power struggles. You, a palace maid, were inextricably caught in this intricate web of political maneuvering. Regardless of your rank or department, you were constantly surrounded by thousands of people, other maids, eunuchs, court ladies, consorts, and royal family members, but true trust was a dangerous illusion. It truly sucked to live in a beautiful snake pit. The sources of intrigue were manifold. Rival consorts, Hugung as discussed in the episode about the queen's miserable life. The consorts constantly vied for the king's favor and the ultimate prize of bearing a male heir. Their ambition directly translated into schemes to undermine rivals, including you if you were associated with a disliked consort, or if you were perceived to know too much. Political factions Bungdang, powerful scholar-official factions outside the palace often extended their influence into the inner court through their female relatives, queens, consorts, and their networks of loyal palace maids and eunuchs. Your presence, however low-ranking, could be leveraged by these factions for intelligence, rumor-mongering, or subtle sabotage. Ambitious eunuchs Negwan eunuchs, particularly those in high positions, wielded immense influence due to their close proximity to the king. They could be powerful allies or dangerous enemies. Some would use palace maids as spies or tools in their own schemes for wealth and power. Jealous colleagues, even among your fellow palace maids. Competition for favor, promotions, or better assignments could lead to petty jealousies escalating into dangerous betrayals. The primary weapons in this clandestine warfare were whispers and slander, a seemingly innocent conversation, a misinterpreted glance, or a fabricated story could be subtly spread through the palace grapevine, reaching the ears of your superiors or even the royal family. These rumors, designed to discredit, accuse, or simply sow distrust, could destroy your reputation, lead to severe punishment, or even death. Imagine living every day on edge, constantly censoring your words, perpetually aware that a single innocent remark could be twisted into a malicious accusation. It really sucked to be condemned by gossip. The palace was riddled with spies and informers, high-ranking officials, queens, consorts, and powerful eunuchs would all cultivate their own networks of informants among the lower-ranking palace staff. Your own fellow maids, or even junior eunuchs you worked alongside, could be secretly reporting your activities, your conversations, or any perceived missteps to their patrons, hoping to gain favor or a reward. This created an atmosphere of pervasive paranoia where you could never truly relax, never fully trust anyone, constantly wondering whose loyalty was genuine and whose was merely a facade. Imagine smiling at a colleague, knowing they might be listening for a reason to ruin you. It truly sucked to be spied on by everyone. Surveillance was constant. Even if it wasn't always obvious, your movements were generally known due to rigid palace protocols. Your interactions were observed. Any unusual behavior, any deviation from your expected routine could be noted and reported. This created a profound sense of psychological imprisonment, making you perpetually aware of unseen eyes, unable to truly be yourself or pursue any personal interests that might be deemed suspicious. Your freedom was confined to your inner thoughts, and even those felt at risk. The consequences of being caught in the web of palace intrigue were terrifyingly severe. Public humiliation and beatings. For lesser involvement, you might face harsh interrogations. Public humiliation as discussed in the royal divorce episode, or brutal beatings with wooden rods, leaving you physically scarred and deeply shamed. Confinement or demotion, you could be confined to a small, dark room for weeks, or demoted to the lowest ranks, stripped of any privileges you had gained, and forced into even more arduous labor, expulsion from the palace. This was a devastating punishment, throwing you, a woman who knew no other life, into destitution and social ostracization in the outside world, often without family or means of support. Torture and execution. For serious involvement in treasonous plots, assassination attempts, or perceived threats to the royal family, you could face agonizing torture to extract confessions about accomplices, followed by brutal execution. Often in secret within the palace grounds, your actions could also bring severe repercussions upon your distant birth family, leading to their disgrace, banishment, or even death. The harem conspiracy against King Danjong in the mid-15th century, for example, saw numerous palace women, including maids, implicated and brutally punished for their alleged involvement in plots related to the succession, highlighting the deadly stakes of palace intrigue. Similarly, the frequent factional strife, like the Sajang incident of 1589, often involved networks of palace insiders, including maids and eunuchs, in intelligence gathering and rumor mongering, leading to widespread purges and executions. This common historical fact of palace intrigue as a deadly game for everyone involved, regardless of rank, serves as a stark reminder of the constant peril. One unique detail, sometimes overlooked, is the psychological impact of being a victim of character assassination in a world where your reputation was everything. Having false rumors spread about your piety, your loyalty, or your moral character could be as devastating as physical punishment. You would constantly battle against an unseen enemy, trying to clear your name against whispers that had no tangible source, leading to profound anxiety and helplessness. This insidious form of attack, designed to isolate and discredit, was a constant source of mental anguish, making your life a perpetual struggle against your own tarnished image. Historians still meticulously study Joseon court records like the Seongjong-won Ilgi, the daily records of the royal secretariat, which often contain detailed reports on palace intrigues, disciplinary actions, and accusations against palace staff, providing invaluable, though sometimes biased, insights into the pervasive atmosphere of suspicion and constant danger. Furthermore, the very invisibility you were trained for, as discussed in Chapter 4, meant to keep you safe from drawing attention, paradoxically made you an even more effective tool for intrigue. You could move through the palace unseen, listen unnoticed, and carry messages discreetly, making you a vital, yet ultimately disposable, asset in the schemes of others. Your very nature as a palace maid, designed for seamless service, inadvertently exposed you to even greater dangers from the undercurrents of power. The psychological toll of living in such a pervasive atmosphere of distrust, conspiracy, and constant fear would be immense. You would live with profound paranoia, constantly self-censoring your words and actions, forever questioning the loyalty of those around you. Sleep would be restless, plagued by nightmares of plots and betrayals. This relentless mental strain, this inability to truly relax or confide in anyone, would erode your peace of mind, leading to profound stress, cynicism, and a pervasive sense of loneliness. Your existence was a constant tightrope walk where your life and fate were determined by the ruthless ambitions of others. So, your life as a Joseon palace maid was profoundly miserable and invisible because it was consumed by palace intrigue. You navigated a treacherous world of whispers, spies, and silent betrayal, where ambitious consorts and political factions constantly schemed. This pervasive atmosphere of paranoia, coupled with the terrifying consequences of being caught in a plot, was a defining, profoundly miserable aspect of your service, ensuring that your gilded cage was a permanent state of fearful subservience, where danger lurked in every shadow. Even as you wrestled with the agonizing paranoia of palace intrigue and the chilling loneliness of enforced celibacy, your life as a Joseon palace maid was constantly threatened by a more tangible and widespread enemy disease and decay. Forget a pristine, healthy existence, the unsanitary conditions of the palace, coupled with demanding labor and primitive medical care, ensured that illness was rampant, making your service profoundly miserable and invisible. Imagine the pervasive dread that would settle over you with every cough from a fellow maid, every sudden fever among the eunuchs, or every report of illness in the royal family. While the palace might appear opulent, it was a confined, densely populated environment, and medieval understanding of sanitation and germ theory was virtually non-existent. This made it a perfect breeding ground for disease. It truly sucked to live in a beautiful germ factory. The sources of illness were manifold and constantly present. Rudimentary sanitation. Despite efforts to maintain cleanliness, the palace lacked modern plumbing and waste disposal systems. Human waste from hundreds or thousands of residents' royal family, consorts, palace maids, eunuchs, guards was collected in chamber pots and emptied into large, often overflowing cesspits. These pits, and the general waste accumulating in various corners of the vast complex, attracted flies, rats, and other vermin, which were notorious carriers of disease. Imagine the pervasive stench and the constant awareness that filth was never far, however much it was cleaned. Contaminated water, water for drinking, cooking, and bathing was drawn from wells or cisterns within the palace grounds. These sources could easily become contaminated by seepage from cesspits or general runoff, especially after heavy rains. Drinking this water was a constant gamble, leading to widespread waterborne diseases like dysentery, the bloody flux, typhoid fever, and various parasitic infections, which would rapidly spread through the crowded palace population. Overcrowding and poor ventilation. You, like many lower-ranking maids, would share cramped, often unheated, dormitories with dozens of other women. These tight quarters with limited fresh air circulation, especially in winter when windows were shut for warmth, provided ideal conditions for respiratory illnesses to spread like wildfire. Colds would quickly escalate into severe bronchitis, pneumonia, or tuberculosis. The persistent smoke from indoor braziers or the ondol heating system, if not properly ventilated, would also irritate lungs, exacerbating these conditions. Malnutrition and stress. While palace maids generally received regular food, their diet might be monotonous and lacking in specific fresh nutrients over long periods, leading to subtle nutritional deficiencies that could compromise their immune systems. The immense physical toil, sleep deprivation from long hours and night duties, and constant psychological stress from strict protocol, fear of superiors, and palace intrigue further weakened their bodies, making them highly susceptible to any circulating pathogen. This weakened state meant that common illnesses, which a healthy body might typically fight off, could quickly escalate into life-threatening conditions. You would constantly hear the hacking coughs of your sisters, the groans of the fevered, and witness their rapid decline. Disease claimed lives relentlessly, turning your beautiful workplace into a place of pervasive suffering and unexpected death. It really sucked to see your friends wither away from unknown causes. Medical knowledge and care within the Joseon palace, while possessing some unique strengths like royal physicians trained in herbal medicine and acupuncture, were still primitive by modern standards. There was no understanding of germs, no antibiotics, no sterile environments for treatment. Royal physicians might prescribe complex herbal concoctions, perform acupuncture, or use rudimentary surgical procedures. However, their efficacy against widespread infectious diseases was limited. If you, a palace maid, fell severely ill, your survival depended entirely on your body's own resilience and immense luck, while the royal family had access to the best available care. Common maids might receive more basic treatment or be simply confined until they recovered or succumbed. It really sucked to be sick when only luck could save you. The mortality rate within the palace walls could be surprisingly high during epidemics, often mirroring or even exceeding those in the general population due to the concentrated nature of life there. A single outbreak of a contagious disease could sweep through entire departments, decimating the ranks of maids and eunuchs, the constant turnover of staff, often due to illness and death, further underscores the grim reality of life within the palace. You would mourn your sisters, knowing their fate could be yours at any moment, creating a pervasive atmosphere of fear and grief that permeated even the most opulent chambers. One common misconception is that the Joseon royal palace, being the residence of the divine monarch, was perfectly clean and healthy. In reality, like most large medieval or early modern institutions, it faced immense challenges with sanitation, waste management, and disease control due to overcrowding and the lack of modern public health infrastructure. While efforts were made to keep certain royal quarters clean, the overall environment presented significant health risks for its thousands of inhabitants, particularly the serving staff. Historians still meticulously study Joseon dynasty court medical records like the Yuibang Yuchui, a massive royal medical encyclopedia, and daily medical diaries of court physicians, as well as archaeological findings from palace waste pits, to understand the precise prevalence of diseases, common ailments, and the limitations of royal medical care, consistently revealing a far from pristine health environment, even for royalty, and especially for their numerous servants. Furthermore, the psychological toll of constantly battling sickness, of watching your fellow maids suffer and die from agonizing diseases, and of knowing that your own body was always at risk, would be immense. This pervasive atmosphere of illness and death eroded morale, fostered despair, and made every day a grim countdown to the inevitable. Your existence was a perpetual struggle against unseen enemies, turning your workplace into a place of constant fear and misery. The sounds of coughing, the smell of sickness compounding the other palace stenches, and the sight of emaciated bodies would be a constant, harrowing reality. Even if you yourself survived, this grim reality underscored the profound physical misery beneath the surface of palace grandeur. The lack of any effective escape from disease was also a significant source of misery. You couldn't simply leave the palace if an epidemic struck. You were confined within its walls, compelled to continue your duties, even if it meant exposing yourself daily to contagion. Your absolute dedication to service, which kept you in the palace, also trapped you in an environment rife with illness, making your security a profound paradox. So, your life as a Joseon palace maid was profoundly miserable and invisible because disease and decay were constant companions. The pervasive cold, the chronic physical strain, and the unsanitary living conditions within the palace walls made you perpetually vulnerable to rampant respiratory, gastrointestinal, and other infectious diseases that claimed lives at an astonishing rate. This horrifying prevalence of illness, coupled with primitive medical care, ensured that your precious, magnificent workplace was also a perpetually unhealthy and often deadly place to inhabit, making every shift a profound and agonizing fight for your very existence against unseen, relentless killers. You've endured a child's forced sacrifice to the court, suffered brutal training that stripped away your identity, existed within a rigid palace hierarchy that limited your every move, toiled endlessly in unseen labor day and night, meticulously followed suffocating protocols, trembled under the master's unpredictable whim, grappled with the heartbreaking reality of forbidden love and emotional isolation, and navigated a treacherous world of palace intrigue, all while battling rampant disease and decay in unsanitary conditions. As the distant whispers of court ladies fade and the phantom scent of old incense finally dissipates, a profound, lingering truth settles upon you. Your life as a Joseon palace maid was one of profound misery, anonymity, and ultimate oblivion. a gilded cage where proximity to power came at the cost of your very self. Consider the fundamental dehumanization that defined every moment of your existence. From the moment a young child were separated from your family and thrust into the palace, you ceased to be an individual. Your identity was systematically stripped away. Replaced by your rank and department, you were trained to be an invisible servant, a silent cog in the vast imperial machinery, existing solely to facilitate the lives of the royal family. Your personal desires, your dreams, your very humanity were systematically suppressed, leaving you a living shadow in the magnificent halls of power. It truly sucked to be an unseen, unacknowledged ghost. Then there's the relentless, pervasive physical and psychological torment. Your body was consumed by endless, physically exhausting labor, from scrubbing latrines to hauling water and polishing brass, often for long hours in cold, damp, and dimly lit conditions. You battled chronic fatigue, the pain of repetitive strain injuries, and the insidious decay from rampant diseases that thrived in the palace's unsanitary environment. Mentally, you endured constant fear of arbitrary punishment, of displeasing a master, of being caught in palace intrigues. The rigid protocol and forced emotional repression further eroded your spirit, leaving you in a state of perpetual vigilance and silent suffering. Your golden cage was a torture chamber for the soul. And what about the crushing isolation and ultimate denial of personal fulfillment? Your ties to your birth family were severely restricted, leaving you without the warmth of familial affection. Your life was marked by enforced celibacy, denying you the fundamental human experiences of romantic love, marriage, and motherhood. You were surrounded by thousands, yet utterly alone, unable to form genuine, intimate bonds due to rigid hierarchy, pervasive suspicion, and the fear of informers. Your pursuit of personal happiness was forbidden, your natural desires systematically suppressed, leaving you with a profound sense of loneliness and unfulfilled longing that haunted your entire life. It really sucked to be alone in a crowd of thousands. Finally, the ultimate irony of your oblivion. You dedicated your entire life to the service of the most powerful family in the kingdom, contributing to the daily grandeur and seamless functioning of the royal court. Yet your existence was fundamentally invisible. Your countless hours of labor, your sacrifices, your personal suffering all went largely unacknowledged and unrecorded. Your name, your individual story, would be lost to history. A mere statistic in the vast rosters of palace servants, you lived and died within the most prominent institution in the land, yet left almost no personal trace. Your legacy dissolved into the collective, unseen effort. Your life was spent making others' lives splendid, while your own vanished into oblivion. It truly sucked to be erased by history. The very concept of the Gungnyeo palace maid encapsulates the complex, often tragic, position of women in Joseon society, particularly those serving the royal family. While some aspects of their lives might offer more security than a peasant's, the complete denial of personal autonomy, the lifelong service, and the extreme constraints on their individual lives underscore the pervasive exploitation inherent in the imperial system. Their collective efforts ensured the smooth functioning of the court, but their personal lives were often marked by profound loneliness and hardship, highlighting the dark side of royal splendor. One particularly poignant and often overlooked detail is the practice of cholgung kolgung, the leaving the palace ritual for retired Gungnyeo. While extremely rare and typically only granted to very old, high-ranking maids who had served for decades, it symbolized a brief, fleeting moment of freedom. However, these women often found themselves utterly alone and disoriented in the outside world, without family or social connections, having known no other life than the palace. Their accumulated wealth might buy them a small house, but it could not buy them lost time, lost youth, or lost bonds. This poignant retirement often highlighted the very profound isolation they had endured, making their freedom a bittersweet and often lonely experience. Historians still meticulously study remnants of Gungnyeo records like the Gungnyeo Aodam, which offers rare glimpses into their personal conversations and feelings, alongside general palace administrative records, to piece together the diverse experiences and ultimate fates of these unseen women, confirming the profound personal cost of their service. Ultimately, your life as a Joseon palace maid was a profound paradox. You existed in close proximity to absolute power, surrounded by immense opulence and serving a divine monarch. Yet, this very privilege was a gilded cage, a brutal reality of unwavering servitude, physical and psychological torment, emotional isolation, and eventual oblivion. Your existence was a testament to the immense personal sacrifice demanded by the imperial system, ensuring that your miserable and invisible life was spent in unseen toil, leaving behind a legacy woven from both silk and profound human suffering. As you now drift into a deep, comforting sleep, let the distant whispers of the ancient palace and the imagined stillness of unseen courtyards finally subside. You are safe in your own time, far removed from the brutal realities of ancient court service. May your dreams be peaceful, filled with the quiet certainty of personal autonomy, the warmth of genuine human connection, and the profound comfort of a life where your worth is seen, your voice is heard, and your story is remembered. A stark contrast to the miserable and invisible truth we've explored tonight. And now, good night, and have sweet dream.